And we're live. Friends from around the world, welcome to the Great Debate. Not a debate where both sides work to defeat one another, rather, a debate where both sides work together to find common ground. It's great to have you here with us. Last week we took a little break. We had a week off. I hope you missed us. I sure missed you. Today, we're going to talk about solutions and narratives. We have two awesome guests. Before I bring them on, just quick announcements. As always, we're going to do after party in Discord. Just dropped a link in the chat. You can find that there. A big shout out to our Patreon supporters, our Patreon visionary supporters. We have Trivium Energy Pty Ltd. That's a green energy company in Australia. We have SOG Cannabis. That's a cannabis company in California. The green companies love us. And then we have a shout out to Max Marine and Geffen Posner, also Patreon visionary members. If you want to become a patron of ours, and get your name shouted out, you can find a link to our Patreon in the description. And there are other ways to support us as well. All support is greatly appreciative, and it really helps us on our mission to connect between people in conflict. So thank you in advance. If you're new, like, subscribe. It's great to see you here. We hope you stick around. Without further ado, my two guests. To my top left, we have Adiel Cohen, an Israeli influencer who uses TikTok as a political platform to share his ideas around the Israel-Palestine conflict from the Israeli perspective. It's good to have you here, Adiel.
Good to be here.
And to my top right, Mohammad Faraj is a Palestinian-American from Ramallah. He's an educator who dedicates his free time discussing various topics, including the Palestine-Israel conflict and advocating for human solutions to the conflict. So great to have you both here. I'm excited for this session. We got two awesome dudes right here. Shout out to everybody in the chat. I see you. Good to have you here as well. So before we get into narratives, I just want to point something out. I just kind of read off both Adiel and Mohammad's bios, and the bios are generally submitted to me by the guests. I modify them a little bit, but as you saw, Mohammad, in his bio, it says the Palestine-Israel conflict. In Adiel's bio, it's the Israel-Palestine conflict. So just there, we can see a difference in narrative, how the name of the conflict is framed. We're going to start by talking just on the topic of narratives. Mohammad, you're going to go first. Just share the Palestinian narrative from your perspective.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. So as far as my experience as a Palestinian, both living in Palestine, I grew up there for a large chunk of my life. So I would say about 9 years. I went to an American school over there, and I also moved back and forth from the United States, where I currently live. And my ideas of the conflict have changed over time, but something that's remained constant or consistent throughout my life is the rights of Palestinians within the West Bank and the rights of Palestinian refugees that live outside of it, and how we haven't reached a solution to reach their needs. There are still millions of Palestinians refugees in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon that are stateless. They don't have the citizenship of the countries that they reside in, and want to desperately come back to their homes. And so I'm more interested in talking about how we reached the point where we are now, and what steps need to be taken in order to solve this conflict, and of course acknowledge the pain and suffering of our Jewish brothers and sisters along the way, but hoping that that one struggle or one version of oppression does not justify another type of oppression. So yeah.
Thank you, Mohammad. Adiel, the Israeli narrative from your perspective.
Okay, I have to say, the word narrative for me, I don't know why. Like, it's weird to call it a narrative. Like we are so used to like call the other side, oh, like they have a narrative, but like the history is on our side, and like I'm talking about like from a general Israeli perspective. So like, it was the first time I think I heard the term Israeli narrative, and it kind of like it made me like realize some things, you know, that like how we look at our like relations between Israelis and Palestinians, regarding our history, narratives, national aspirations, and all that. So for me, I guess growing up as a Jew in Israel, we tend to forget. I'm talking about like the third generation, my generation. We tend to forget that less than a century ago, as a nation, we were still in the diaspora, and everything is so like obvious for us. You know, we have Israel, we have our homeland, and it's our home. We feel connected to it. We don't know any other reality without it. But on the other hand, from young age, we are taught that we have a long and vicious history of diaspora persecution, pogroms, a genocide, the Holocaust, exile, obviously, from our previous kingdom. And it's always like this balance between fear and hope. I think for me, like this is what defines the Israeli Jewish narrative. This balance between fear of going back to that place, to the diaspora where we were persecuted, we were weak, we couldn't defend ourselves, we had to like abide by the foreign rule that we were under, and the hope and the pride of coming back to our homeland. I think like it's the biggest part of our identity as a nation. This, you know, just this balance between fear and hope and this pride after we came back to our homeland after 2,000 years. It's kind of like this miracle. This is how we see it.
Thank you, Adiel. So yeah, that it's interesting because you both shared what I think is our core aspect of each narrative, and you know, it shows how fundamentally different they are. You have, you know, Adil, you spoke about a story of liberation, of freedom, yet the need to protect ourselves because we're scared that this state of liberation is under threat. And Mohammad, you described a state of oppression, a state of lack of freedom and liberation. Mm-hmm. These are the distinct narratives of our people. I guess the question is, how do we get to a place where we are both liberated on the same land? Generally, when we ask this question, the fingers just point at each other. Hold on. Whoop. So, you know, I want us to maybe have a more nuanced conversation of how we make this land free for all people, free and secure for all people, because that's, you know, that's what each side is looking for. Mohammad, do you want to speak on that? Because I agree with you. You know, the Palestinian struggle, Palestinian human rights, they're very, very important to myself and most of the guests we bring and the people on this channel. But most Israelis, and understandably so, value their own security over freedom of another population. So how do we push the needle on this topic?
I mean, first of all, it's just about talking about it. So I understand right now there is a sort of taboo in Israel society of talking about anything about the Nakba. I'm pretty sure there are some laws about even bringing up such words such as Nakba. And to Palestinians, the Nakba is the foundation of what makes us Palestinian. It is the collective experience that we were taken over and ethnically cleansed from another population. And so obviously there are many nuances to take into consideration for that. But from the Palestinian perspective, that is our history. Ours is a history of being displaced and disenfranchised. And so right now, the goal is, I believe, is to establish a democratic state within the land where everybody has the right to vote for people that they, for the representatives that represent their ideas, and not be ruled over a foreign, what is seen as a foreign military, and have their lives dictated by a government where they have no say in what actions are done to them vis-a-vis the occupation and the military jurisdiction of Israel within the West Bank and the siege on Gaza. So I believe there's a lot to be worked on. Like, discussing it is, I believe, an important step, but also the acknowledgement of our pain and suffering. I feel like the Palestinians need to are always put in a spot where they need to humanize themselves to the world, saying, "Hey, we're just as humans. We have aspirations just like everybody else." And that's unfortunate because I believe that human rights should be on the forefront of this issue. And doesn't bring me any joy knowing that, Jews have suffered in Europe or in Yemen or in Iraq or in America. I fully acknowledge that Jews have suffered and continue to suffer around the world. But at the same time, I still don't understand that justification for the displacement of my people, the Palestinian people, and the bad situation that we currently live in.
Thank you, Faraj. Adiel, you want to
Yeah,
build
sure.
on that?
So
Cool.
first of all, I think I'm really happy that you brought this nuance, this concept of nuance, because when it comes to talking about the conflict, I think most people don't have this nuanced perspective. It's like either black or white, either Israel or Palestine, and like there's no middle. I think this is how most people see it. And for me, when I advocate for my country, when I talk to Palestinians, to Arabs from other countries about the conflict, nuance is one of the most important things. This is like a basic thing for me when we are talking about such a complex conflict. Now I think, and I wanna clarify that I am not happy with the current status quo. I'm not happy with the situation in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, in Gaza, and the situation of the Palestinian refugees in Arab countries. It's terrible, and it's part of this ongoing conflict that we need to aim to solve. But I'm gonna say, like, I'm gonna present the Israeli perspective of why I think many Israelis, many Jews have a hard time empathizing with the Palestinian cause. After the 47 UN partition plan, the Palestinian Arab leadership was the one that rejected it. At the end of the day, the Jewish leadership accepted it, even without Jerusalem, even without most of what they were initially promised, because they just wanted a country. They just wanted something to live with. And what I hear a lot from my community is, if they wanted a country so much, if they wanted independence, I'm talking about the Palestinians, why didn't they accept it? And I sort of agree. If you're offered something for several decades up until the partition plan, the conflict kept escalating and escalating, and we saw that one state where we share the land is not really possible. So then when the UN offered to part the land, it was also rejected. And not only that, a war was initiated later on by the Palestinian Arab leadership. And for Israelis, from our perspective, we just keep asking why. Like, why didn't they accept it? Why did they start the war. Maybe all of this wouldn't have happened if they just accepted it. So that's our perspective on this specific issue. I do think that Israelis need to, I'm talking, of course, like about myself as well, to stop fearing talking about this issue, because it is an issue, and we do need to come to terms with the Palestinian people and kind of figure out how we move forward from here. But I do think that it's understandable why it's such a taboo for us, why we kind of like no longer care, because we see that like this, it started with rejection, and the rejection kept going ever since then. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
I just wanted to say that like the Palestinian leadership, I don't know exactly what deal you're specifically referring to, but most Israeli negotiators that were there, like for example Camp David, have stated that these deals were bad, and if he was a Palestinian, that they would have rejected it. This was the Israeli negotiator at the time, Camp David. We're saying that many of the deals that were given to the Palestinians were bad, but regardless of that point, Palestinians, I believe, like it wouldn't be difficult to understand that like Palestinians would find it hard to try to negotiate with a government that ethnically cleansed them from their villages in 48, like Palestine, mandatory Palestine. It's very hard to come to the table and say, oh, hey, why don't we just talk this out? Like, why can't we just discuss this? Why do you keep on rejecting offers when half of their ancestors or half of their descendants are living in refugee camps right now? They're coming from a place of pain. And I think the biggest issue is that it's not acknowledged that anything bad happened to the Palestinians, that there is no recognition that there was an injustice done to the Palestinians in 48 on the establishment of the state of Israel. There are a plethora of quotes from leading Zionists at the time of like the beginning of the conflict or the war or the occupation, where they stated that, oh, there are too many Arabs over here. We cannot create a Jewish state with this many Arabs in the land. Whether it comes from individuals like Ben Gurion or Chaim Weizmann or any of these individuals, that they're in their diaries, and there are Israeli historians that fully acknowledge that this is the case, and these are thoughts that they've had. There are even instances where Israeli soldiers were so uncomfortable with the fact that they had to kick out Palestinians from the villages that they had to like be treated for like trauma for their expulsion of like these villages. And so like, I'm not trying to paint Israelis as these soulless evil entity. There were obviously people, there are documents saying that like, you know, some of these soldiers had trouble exiling or depopulating, ethnically cleansing these villages. And it's there, it's all in the archives. Israel has no problem showing it up, but I just don't know why it's not discussed enough. So yeah, that's my concern. And like I said, like, listen, I have no issue with, I understand that Jews have a connection to the idea or the concept of Eretz Israel and of living in the land and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I feel like that shouldn't come at the expense of another people's right to self-determination, especially when they were living there prior to what we now know as the Jewish return to their homeland, right? It just doesn't add up to me. I hope you understand what I mean.
Yeah, I completely understand, and I agree with you on that. On the idea that we do need to talk about it. Like I said, we need to come to terms and negotiate. And I think it starts from from us, from the people themselves. I am not a politician. I don't really care about like politics of like the politics of this conflict or like what the solution is. I'm just here to talk with the Palestinians and hear their perspective. But like I said, for me, nuance is the most important thing when we talk about and there are two main narratives on both sides of the conflict. One is that Israel expelled all the Palestinians and ethnically cleansed them in this like systematic process of ethnic cleansing, and the other narrative is that they all left. All the Palestinians left on their own. Both of those narratives are wrong, and I love looking into the history of the conflict, and especially this war, because it's so nuanced, and again, it's not like this black and white situation. Both Israelis and Palestinians, in my opinion, need to realize that it's not one way or the other. It's a bunch of reasons that caused the displacement of the Palestinians. On every quote you present of a Zionist leader, I can show you another quote by Arab leaders that really call for ethnic cleansing of the Jews from the river to the sea, or Azam Pasha from the Arab League, who said blood is going to be spilled Mediterranean like rivers or something along these lines.
Absolutely, and they're wrong. They're wrong.
Of course,
they're bad
people.
Yeah.
We all know that like we can't blame each other for the actions of the leaders back then. But it's so important to understand this nuance. It's so important to understand this, like all those little details that led up to this war, that like all this, like the upbringing of the conflict. You mentioned Chaim Weizmann. Before the war, I think like 20 years before that, he was in touch with the king of Iraq back then. I don't remember his name. I apologize. But the king of Iraq himself, he said that we need to come to terms with the Zionist movement and we need to embrace it. He saw it as a possibility, as an option to reunite with their long lost cousins. And to say that like from the beginning, the Zionist leaders planned to ethnically cleanse the land of the Arab population, I don't think it's true. I can't believe it, because I see a bunch of mixed opinions that evolved with the conflict as the conflict escalated. If we go back all the way to the beginning of modern Zionism with Herzl, if you actually read his books, he specifically says that Haifa is this beacon of coexistence between Arabs and Jews, and the Arabs are like all in high positions, and like he had a very clear vision of coexistence. This is for me what I see. This is for me like the vision that got lost in this conflict.
But it's also like I just want to point out, like, it's also documented that Herzl said that like we need to there needs to be a population change in order for a Jewish state to exist. This is something that was parroted by many Zionist leaders from the beginning of before Israel was ever thought. The thing is that, and I just wanted to like correct something in the sense that like Arab leaders do not represent the Palestinians. I don't know if you know what Fallahi is. We're like peasantry. We're the peasants of like the land of Palestine to us. And we did not have any political representation. We were just farmers that were doing our own thing. And like most of the refugees that were kicked out, like from Lid and from Lod and Ramla, and ended up in Ramallah, are farmers that ended up getting kicked out. They weren't the Arab League members. They weren't the kings of Iraq, or they weren't. These were just normal peasants that didn't have representation, and were just, quite frankly, just driven off the land because they're easy to kick out. They're poor. They didn't know anything about like this whole nation building idea, and so they were just easy to kick out. And I understand. Listen, like it's hard to build a Jewish state when you have so many non-Jews in the area. And the point is I'm trying to make is that maybe it's time for a state for both peoples. maybe it's time where we make a state for Palestinians and Jews. That could completely happen. That could there's plenty of examples of two ethnic groups that have lived side by side and developed a mechanism that works. I mean, is it possible that Palestinians and Israelis will love each other like I don't know, brothers and sisters? Maybe not, but it doesn't have to be that serious. The goal is the main goal is just to have the enfranchisement of Palestinians within the land, because it sucks to me it's quite frankly, I was watching some of your TikToks just to prep and stuff, and so it's unfortunate to see that if an Israeli soldier stops me on which happens quite frequently, happens when I'm traveling between cities. If he I'll be honest with you, sometimes they don't give you any trouble. Most of the time they don't give you any trouble. But if one of them decides to give you some trouble, what are you going to do about it? What's me as a Palestinian? What can I do? Do I call up Beit Il and tell them, hey, I would like to rate this soldier 4 out of 10 because he hit me with the butt of his gun? I can't do anything about it, and it's unfortunate. That shouldn't be the way people, a native person to the land, should be treated. And me, I live a relatively decent life. I'm not there are many Palestinians that have suffered way more than I've ever imagined of suffering, and it just having a taste of it is just made me think this is insane. How could anyone accept this? How could anyone defend a system like this? Obviously, there are going to be terrorists and all these sort of things, but in the end of the day, this system that Israel has in place now perpetuates violence and is in the long term harmful for everybody. No one benefits from it. It's not good for Israelis. It's not good for Jews. It's not good for Palestinians, and it's definitely not good for humanity from a human perspective. And so, there needs to be something that addresses the concern without alienating the rest of the world from alienating Palestinians from society. You could live in Ramallah your whole life and never meet an Israeli. All you see are soldiers. And then, when you're in a situation like that, you can develop all kinds of weird ideas. You don't know what an Israeli is because you've never seen one. All you know is that they're soldiers and they're occupying your land, and sometimes they say mean things to you when you're at checkpoints, or they'll laugh at you, or they'll make sneers and jeers at you. That's all you know of them. And it's just it's hard to try to understand there's different sort of narratives we need to understand, and it's very difficult from that position. Just to clarify, yeah.
So I want to say, first of all, that again, like I said, I don't advocate specifically for any solution. I do know that two-state solution for me doesn't seem viable in any way. I don't think it ever worked from the beginning. It never worked, and we did try to give away land for peace, and then we saw what happened, and it didn't really go that well. So I don't think.
What are you specifically referring to, if you don't mind me asking?
To Gaza. Now I do know that it's not the most the best solution that they could come up with, but just the idea of giving away land for peace kind of backfired at us and the Palestinians. I don't believe in dividing the land. I think the land is one, and I think that everyone in this land should live in dignity with full rights and equal rights, whether they're Jewish or Arab or Palestinians or whatever they decide to refer to themselves. And I completely agree with you that ultimately I would like to see the IDF out of Judea and Samaria. I would like to see the IDF in the borders where an army should be, and not among civilian population, especially not in the heartland of what I claim to be my homeland, what the Jewish people claim to be their homeland, Judea and Samaria, where all our holy and historical sites are. To me, it's heartbreaking, and ultimately, I would like to see this status quo ends, including the wall. As much as Israelis are terrified of, the consequences of the second Intifada, and I completely agree. I'm not saying the wall should go down tomorrow the wall of the fence. It's mostly a fence, to be honest. But it doesn't matter. It's a barrier, and it should go down, especially when it divides our homeland and prevents from those two populations to come together and, you know, start heading towards peace. Now, I have a lot of criticism towards the PA and UNRWA that, along with the Palestinian experience with Jews, which is like mostly with IDF soldiers, completely understandable why they would hate them. I believe that the PA and UNRWA and Hamas in Gaza, they don't do anything to help that. If anything, they just make things worse and like add more fuel to the fire. It's pretty well known and well documented that the curriculum in schools in those regions are very anti-Semitic, and at the end of the day, I would like to see the PA not exist anymore. I do think that we need to come up with some sort of a solution of a government that represents both people, that takes care of both people and ensures rights, freedom of movement, which I think is the most important thing, and the end of the hatred, of the animosity. Along with my criticism of the PA and UNRWA, I also have criticism towards the Israeli government. I, as an Israeli who is very proudly Jewish, Zionist, Israeli, this is like my personality, like my entire personality. The fact that I only met an Arab when I got to the army, for me, it's outrageous. We live together, we work together, like we are in the workforce together. Arabs make up 1/3 of the doctors in Israeli hospitals. It's crazy, you know, considering their like percentage in like of the total population. And I do think that we need to, how do I say it? I do think that the Israeli government could do more to bring those two populations together. I'm talking about first Jews and Israeli Arabs, not even the Palestinians. But I think that Israeli Arabs or Israeli or Palestinian citizens of Israel, whatever you want to call them, I know that it's like controversial. I think that they could be our bridge to the Palestinians at the end of the day. I would like to see more joint operations, joint activities between Jewish and Arab schools in Israel to get to know one another. I would like Israeli schools, like Jewish schools, to teach Arabic from, you know, from second grade, like they do with English. Because the way I see it now, I work in a hotel with many Arabs and Palestinians from Judea and Samaria that come with permits. And many of them know Hebrew, but most of Israeli Jews, I don't think they know Arabic. And I think that these are the little things that could influence the entire population to come together, you know, to communicate with one another, and to most importantly, to humanize. Because once we get to know each other, once we see each other eye to eye, and not as this oppressor versus oppressed, terrorists versus civilians or whatever, this is the only way, I think, to peace. I think we were kind of like indoctrinated that a solution will bring peace. It's either one state or two state, and this is what we should see, but like what we should aim for. But I don't think a solution would bring peace if there's no peace between the people themselves. I think that first of all, we need to achieve peace between the people, and then come up with a solution. I think I rambled, but yeah, I'm done.
No, thank you, Adiel. A lot of good points. Faraj, before you go, I just want to, because we're moving into some new topics, I do kind of want to summarize a little bit about the difference in narratives that we touched on. So, you know, Adiel explained Palestinian rejectionism, how our narrative is that Palestinians continuously reject every peace agreement. So, in our discourse, in our narrative, we say, obviously peace is on them. We've tried, they keep rejecting it. There's nothing more we can do. Faraj, as what you explained is, A, Palestinians haven't felt like the deals were good enough, and B, you feel like there's a very difficult history, primarily the Nakba, which has not been addressed, acknowledged, or reconciled, and that you feel is a very important part of the process.
Also, most importantly, is like the Israeli negotiators themselves admitted years later that the deals were bad.
Okay, yeah, and then
because
there's
I think any two-state solution was meant to fail, in my opinion, at least.
I
because
think
of both sides.
I think in time that notion is becoming more clear. It seems like most of the people we've had on the show do not support the two-state solution. This is not intentional. This is just how it turns out to be. One idea I want to put out there, because I think we need to start talking about it more. Israeli military presence in the West Bank, it causes a lot of harm to the Palestinian people. It's a form of collective punishment. They are harmed for our own security, right? To keep the Jews in the West Bank safe, we need to collectively punish the Palestinians.
Not only in the West Bank, by the way, but like all over Israel.
Yeah, but the military presence would be much less felt if they were simply on the border and not going through towns. It's like one of the reasons there's so many checkpoints. There's home searches. The military presence is so felt, not just because it's troops on a border. It's actually troops within the land. So this is something we need to find a solution to. And I know many Palestinians have the notion just they want a unilateral pullout. That to Israeli sounds crazy, because we're not just going to leave the Jews there without security. And then Palestinians may say, we'll pull all the citizens out as well. That's 500,000 people. There's really no political discussion about doing that whatsoever. I'm trying to ground these ideas in pragmatism and reality, but I think there's something we can do to drastically reduce the harm the military force causes, and that is remove the military force, have it be a civilian peacekeeping force of Israelis who speak fluent Arabic, who are highly trained, who treat the Palestinians with dignity and respect, and in time build that force to not just be Israelis, but have it be a Palestinian-Israeli peacekeeping force that keeps the citizens of the land safe and treats them as equal. This is within the realm of reality. This is something we could work towards. So I do want to put it out there, because we do need to start making this part of the national conversation. We need to withdraw the military, and we need to replace it with a civilian peacekeeping force instead of a military force. Our security cannot be at the expense of another population's well-being. That's my interjection as a moderator, but it was important for me to say.
Absolutely, no problem. I was gonna say that it's also important that there are already Israeli police already are in the West Bank. They most of them speak Arabic. I feel like the police has a lot more Arabic speakers than the soldiers than the army does. But also I feel one thing that Israel can do tomorrow to make things easier is give Palestinians easier time getting Israeli citizenship. It just makes no sense to me that me, a Palestinian, I was born in Jerusalem, don't got a blue ID though. Because I'm not from there.
Faraj, do you think they would accept that? Do you think Palestinians would accept an Israeli
I mean,
citizen?
listen, whether Palestinians accept it or not, just have it out there, just as a show of goodwill. Just say here, if you guys want it, you guys can take it. And that just leave it like that, and maybe that could help in terms of slowly integrating Palestinians if that's what Israel wants. Because whatever this situation is now is not sustainable, and it's not going to last very long. I don't think so. And another thing is that in terms of, I wanted to just address this point of the PA curriculum. I listen, the PA, they have their problems. I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to sit here and defend the PA. But I've used the PA curriculum from 4th to 12th grade. Not one textbook has ever said anything anti-Semitic. You can go look it up if anyone knows. If you have a friend that speaks Arabic, you can go look up the PA Arabic curriculum or anything curriculum. It's all up there. There's nothing. There's not an anti-Semitic thing. They talk about the Nakba, and they talk about like the suffering of Palestinians and poetry, and we learned about all these Palestinian poets, Mahmoud Darwish, Fadwa Tuqan, and all these individuals. But I was never taught. I had a kid in my class who told the history teacher, said that started questioning the Holocaust. The teacher kicked him out of class. This was in like 10th grade. This was in Palestine. Kicked him out of the class. This whole thing. Maybe in Gaza it's a different situation. I don't know what's going on in Gaza, but this whole idea that in the West Bank we're taught to hate Jews, and it's just like it's in our curriculum. There is this. I'm a graduate from the West Bank. I'm in America. I don't think I'm anti-Semitic. I've never gotten the impression that I'm supposed to hate Jews for being Jews or something like that. Everything was in the context of the conflict, in the context of the occupation, in the context of nightly raids, of the night invasions, of the shooting of children, of all these sort of things. It was nothing. And like I said, I'm a person that very much appreciates the Jewish history and the suffering that Jews have gone through the world. I'm someone that deeply sympathizes with that. But at the same time, I just find it troubling to use the suffering of Jews, whether it be in like the programs in Russia or the Holocaust in Germany and Poland, and use that to justify the ethnic cleansing of like Palestinians. That's really my concern. That I want a state where anybody has a right to move into the land and set up and be part of a greater community of Palestinians, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, or Israelis, or whatever identity they want to hold. So that's one way I'm thinking about it. And yeah, I had something else to say, but it'll come back to me shortly.
I feel though, Muhammad, that you're like a unique voice within your community. From my experience, and again, I'm not generalizing. I'm saying, just from my experience, I also I served in Judea and Samaria for a short period of time of my military service, and we've seen preachers at mosques inciting to terror. We've seen books that were
in Palestine that will not listen. During the siege in Gaza, 2014, the siege when Israel was dropping white phosphorus on Gaza, chemical warfare. That Friday, the sheikh, the preacher in the mosque was talking about marital rights and how to divide the dowry of to your children. That same Friday, the day before,
again, that's my perspective, that's my experience, and I've seen it firsthand. And most of the Palestinians I talk to, unfortunately, I'm saying it with it's sad to me. Many of them told me that there's no Jewish education. There's no education about the Holocaust or who the Jewish people are. A girl from Jenin with whom I've talked a while back, she told me that she specifically wasn't taught to hate Jews, but they just don't talk about them. Another girl I talked to told me that they are actively taught to hate Jews or to deny the Jewish history, talking about how Jews came all of a sudden from Europe, poof.
But that's going to vary from family to family, right? But as long as it's not the curriculum of the government's not, the PA itself is not saying, listen, you need to teach your kids to do this. Then listen, I'm I'm not the biggest fan of the PA. I don't want to sit here. I'm not.
I completely understand, but other studies proved otherwise. Even the countries that fund UNRWA, for example, they found that in their books, in their textbooks, there are anti-Semitic narratives, and it needs to be acknowledged, in my opinion, that and the incitement of the PA itself against the Jewish people. And I completely agree with you that I think, especially in East Jerusalem, Palestinians should have it easier to apply for citizenships. But when it comes to the the greater picture, I can also understand why for Israelis or like the Israeli government, it's hard to do it, because they see that on the other side there's a system that incites for hate and anti-Semitism. And this is like a fear that not only I share, but I think most Israelis. Yeah.
No, yeah, absolutely. Like I hear you, and but the point is that, like, I think maybe you're probably right. There needs to be. I'm not going to say here that we were taught about the Holocaust every day of our lives, or we're taught about Jewish suffering every day of our life. But you have to understand from a Palestinian perspective. It's when the context is very strange for us to start talking about this thing, because we are right now occupied by Israel. They control like everything that's going on about us, and at this point, we can't even help ourselves. Yet it seems like Israel's asking us to like sympathize, I believe, which is very important. But it's like we don't even we have no power, we have no control over our own destiny, and yet we seem to ask like for more, to give Israel more sympathy when we're not even given our basic human rights. You know, I can't.
No,
like,
I completely understand. It's not sympathy that we ask for. It's more of like recognition of our existence, of our connection to the land, of our history to the land. But
Adiel, I understand. Like
very few are the people of your community that I've talked to that actually know about like Jewish connection to the land and the Jewish history, and that's like in the good case if they don't deny it. And again, like I don't generalize, and like I said, I have like tons of coworkers from the West Bank in my like the hotel I work at, and we have the greatest conversations. I sit with them for lunch every day, and you know, we're friends. I can see the peace happening on the ground. But with that happening, like there's also a very huge problem that needs to be fixed in the Palestinian community and in the Palestinian government, for us, for Israelis to fully feel comfortable with the Palestinian people, the Palestinian cause, and coexistence eventually.
Absolutely. The thing is, Ariel, which I feel like I have trouble discussing this with a lot of other Zionists and Israelis, is that having a particular connection to a land does not, in practicality, doesn't really justify anything. I would love to live in a country where all Jews are welcome to come to Israel and feel connection, their land, to the connection, their Jewish connection to Eretz Israel. Like I would love that, but like having a kingdom 3,000 or whatever thousand years ago does not justify it. And like I feel like it's not an argument that would, quite frankly, be used by anyone else. Like we wouldn't use the argument that African Americans have a right to the Congo or Angola. Because
do they claim right of return to the Congo or Angola?
But even if they did, does that mean that they could? If they did, does that mean they can go to a random hill in the Congo or Angola and just say, "Yep, this is mine"? Whoever's here, please.
I definitely think they can advocate for it if they have their national aspirations.
They can come in and like my idea is that they could come in and join with everybody else, and we can form a unity government where everybody has equal rights. But the idea of Israel is to create a Jewish state, to make an exclusive state for one ethnicity over others. It's okay to have Arabs in the state. It's completely fine as long as they remain the minority.
It is a misconception though, because the first leaders that came to this land didn't talk about Jewish majority or expelling Palestinians or whatever that. Like this idea only came later when the conflict started happening and like the violence started like escalating more and more and more. Our right for self-determination, our right to reestablish a Jewish entity in the land that we're indigenous to, in the land that we come from, in the land that we've stayed for under 2,000 years of like different colonizing powers. it doesn't contradict with giving the Arabs or the non-Jews, the Palestinians who live in this land, full equal rights. It's just that from the beginning, it wasn't accepted. The return of the Jewish people to the land wasn't accepted by some of the Palestinian people, and mainly
We
the
had no power.
leadership.
We had no power. Ottomans were controlled, and the British were under control afterwards. And the Ottomans let many Jews immigrate, and the British halted it for a little, but then let it.
But they still had their local governments, and they still had the High Arab Committee, which was extremely anti-Semitic, and they were very clear with their intentions. So, like, for us, when people say, "Oh, how can we sympathize with like a Jewish state? How can we sympathize with the Zionist movement?" Now, I understand. Like, I don't expect anyone to identify as a Zionist, but I do expect people to recognize our right to do so, with equal rights to everyone in the land. I'm talking about like from the beginning. Nowadays, it's a bit different because there's a whole conflict going on. So people think differently, but I still believe in like the old idea that we can live here in peace in a civilization that is Jewish enough for the Jewish people, that we can control our fate, that we don't need to be feared, to be like to fear of persecution, of pogroms, of foreign rule, that we can have access to our holy sites, which till today we don't have.
Neither do we. I can't go to the Aqsa.
Well, yeah, but we can even pray there. Like we can. Muslims can enter.
You guys can go. Yeah, Muslims can go. I live 2 kilometers away from the Aqsa. I still can't go. I've been there once when I was a little kid, and I've never been there since. And it's like there was nothing I can do. If you go around Kalandia or Kufr Aqab or all around like Jerusalem, you can just see a nice big wall that makes it clear that.
And again, it's terrible in my opinion, and I do think that freedom of movement should be established for all the people there. But even like Israeli Jews who live in Israel, who have access to Jerusalem, we can't pray there. We can't enter there like freely. We can only enter there for like 2 hours a day, 4 hours a day. For many Israelis, it's a very huge point, especially religious Israelis.
But Jews still do have access to the Kotel, don't they? Jews still have access to the Kotel, right?
The Kotel,
to the wall, to the Wailing Wall.
Yeah, the Kotel is not the it's not the main thing. The Kotel is like.
I understand. There's like the Beit HaMikdash and all that. It's very important and such, but you have to understand. Like, I feel like the comparison is odd since like Israelis, even like regardless if their access to like the Temple Mount, they still don't. They still have an opportunity to go for a small time. Yeah, obviously they can't pray or whatever, but they can go pray to the Wailing Wall. They can go to the Wailing Wall. Palestinians can't go. Like I can't go outside Ramallah. Like, where could I go? I could go to Ramallah, maybe.
Then you understand
on a good day in a couple cities. That's all I got. But like at least like I had
a compromise.
What is it?
I'm saying for us the Wailing Wall is a temporary compromise. For us, it's not like we're still restricted of our holy site, and
but we're restricted of everything else, Adiel. We're restricted of everything else. We can't. Yeah. We can't go. We can only go to Ramallah. Like I'm from Ramallah. We can only go to 4 cities in the West Bank. Anything else is off limits. We need to get special permission, and if we're lucky, maybe like we can get a tourist visa. Listen, we're tourists in our own country. We can get like the I don't know, the permission slip or the tasarih, we call it, and we can go in for 12 hours and we got to come back fast. So just to make sure that like our restriction of movement is beyond comparison. Like I understand, like I completely understand that Israelis have their concerns and there's a lot to consider, but it's troubling when it's like compared like to like we're like it's like like both sides and like we each have our concerns. Like the life of an average Palestinian, like the things that an average Palestinian in a village of like Burin or I was just watching a video. Thank God for like organizations like B'Tselem that like show what's going on, like of settlers just attacking farmers and stuff. And you know, listen, like I'm not going to deny they're like Palestinians. They go and like, let's say they'll start throwing rocks at Israeli cars and stuff. But at least they'll arrest those Palestinians, right? Who's arresting these settlers? Who? If the soldier decides to smack somebody in the head, who's going to do anything about that? If a lot of these reports, Haaretz, B'Tselem, Yeshdin, all these organizations, these are the only
which some of them I have to say are not the most reliable organizations. But I understand your concern. I am against any violence from the Jewish community in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. But don't you think that all the restriction of movement wouldn't have happened if, you know, from the beginning, the Palestinian Arabs or the Palestinian leadership would just accept our existence in the land and, you know, cooperate and, you know, aim for a joint future? Because I still think that it doesn't happen. Like I don't think the Palestinian leadership or even the Palestinian people, many of them are ready for this conversation.
Because the thing is, it's just like, quite frankly, because people, Israelis have a problem with acknowledging that anything bad happened to the Palestinians. How do you want Palestinians to want to negotiate and say, hey, let's meet halfway, when like our whole like the primordial experience of us being ethnically cleansed is not even acknowledged. It's not even acknowledged what has happened to Palestinians. What happened in like Deir Yassin is probably one instance where it's like sort of like acknowledged. Everything else, there's like, you can go on Wikipedia, there's a list of hundreds of villages that have been razed and depopulated, and it's just like, yeah, it's not. It's like, it was an oopsie. It was a mistake. You know?
I have a question. No, I don't think it was an oopsie. I think it was a huge war that was bloody as hell. But considering that the newly established, even before the state of Israel was established, the Jewish people who were a minority right after the Holocaust, okay, it was right after our people suffered a genocide, they were offered a state. They accepted it, and they saw that their counterparts, the Arab leadership, did not accept it, and not only that, also waged a war against them. Do you understand our need to retaliate in this case? I'm not talking about the things that happened during the war. I'm talking about like the mere need to retaliate.
Here's the thing. Then another point I wanted to point out is that like the Arab leadership
like
of all these.
That's like the context of it. That's all.
No, I understand. I understand your point. It's just that like like again, a lot of these people that were kicked out, they weren't the family members of these Palestinian leaders. These the Palestinian leaders, the Arab leaders that were like fighting Israel at the time. Half of these people didn't really care about like Palestinians either. They don't. In the end of the day, the Palestinian people most of them were peasantry. They were farmers. They had no political power. They had nothing to offer, quite frankly. So the Arab leaders were just doing their own thing to like try to, you know, it's not like all the Arabs in the world were like collaborating and say, oh, we need to just play, you know, like Palestinians had their own things, like were trying to do their own thing, and Arab leaders decided to say like, hey, we want a slice of this new piece of land that's up for grabs. You know what I mean? And like the experience of like, in the end of the day, like half the people that were expelled weren't combatants. They weren't civilians. They were farmers. You can look at the pictures. There's still pictures out there of like how these Syrian refugees, they're not military. They're old ladies, old men, old women, young children, like, you know, people that were like right now and their descendants live in refugee camps. And like, listen, yeah, there were Palestinians, or there were like there were Palestinians that were like militants that were fighting back. But like, what do you expect them to do? To just like say, okay, yes, take our houses and we accept our second class. We accept our second class status as a.
I don't think Arabs in Israel or Palestinians in Israel are second class citizens. Those who accepted the presence of Israel, Abu Ghosh, I think, is a great example. Live in peace, and you know, Abu Ghosh is the beacon of coexistence in Israel, I think. I don't think again, it's like this is what I see a lot among Palestinians I talk to. This idea that we wanted from the beginning to impose this like second-class citizenship and apartheid and all other buzzwords. First time we say apartheid in this discussion, which is like very surprising. And I don't think it's true. Like from what I see, from what I read, you know, reading both sides of what happened, reading, you know, quotes on both sides. I think I froze for a bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back though. You're
Okay,
back. Yeah.
cool. Like saying that this whole war was just like ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, like deliberately. Other studies show otherwise, that many other reasons brought to the displacement of Palestinians. And I'm talking only in the context of that time. I'm not talking about displacement. Obviously today, I get displacement in like any way. Obviously it's not the way to solve anything. But when we're talking about that, like the entire Arab world.
Oh, you're back.
Wow. Okay, I don't know what to do. Like
No, I think it's working.
It's fine now. You can go.
Okay, cool. So like when the Israeli leadership and when the Jewish people back then saw that the entire Arab world is just like clearly trying to annihilate them. But I think I'm freezing. I don't know why, because like my internet is
weird, but I think we could still hear you.
Oh,
even if your camera freezes.
Okay, I hope
yeah, we can still hear the audio.
And you can see like Arab leaders encouraging the Arabs to flee, especially the women and the children, and you can see incitement towards like go fight the Jewish people, and it's all out there. Now, during the later parts of the war, there were like expulsions. This is exactly what I said about this like narrative that like Israelis say that no one was expelled. It's just like they all left, and the Palestinians say that they were all expelled. It's just not true, neither of them, and it's proven.
So Palestinians weren't expelled. You have lines
during the later parts of the war. In certain areas, they were, but to say that the entire war was with a clear intention of expelling the entire Palestinian population is just not true. And we can still see
I have a question.
The Arabs that stayed there and you know didn't fight, and they live there till today.
I have a question, Adiel. Would you be comfortable with a state, with a democratic state where the population is 50% Arab and 50% Jewish?
In the current situation, current
situation,
no.
Why not?
And because currently there's still animosity between the two people. I'm being completely honest here, and I'm all for equal rights, and I'm all for giving rights and citizenship to the Palestinians who are peaceful and willing to live in peace. But in the current situation, when I see that it's a risk of my own people, I would have to choose the safety of my people.
Understood. And I just wanted to point out that, like, I'm telling you, it wasn't. I'm pretty sure there were, like I said, there were soldiers that were very uncomfortable with the idea of ethnically cleansing, and they needed to go, like, had to get a breath of fresh air after all that work. But like, there's even like documents of. There's like in like the library in the diaries of Ben Gurion, all these individuals, all these Zionist leaders had a clear-cut ideas of saying, like, you know, geresh them, you know, drive them out.
But we need to see the context of which this whole thing happened. it didn't start.
That specific context, they were saying, what do we do with the Ramla? What do we do with the Ramla? There's so many Arabs over here.
Because at the later,
guys, real quick, I don't want to get stuck. We've spoken about the Nakba quite a lot. It is contested. It seems like most historians do acknowledge there was some amount of ethnic cleansing, and we do know that Israel, had aspirations to want a Jewish state. You need a demographic majority. The counterclaim is that some were left because they were told from other Arab countries to leave. Some just left in the chaos of war. That being said, none were allowed to return, which is also used to strengthen the claim of ethnic cleansing. That said, it's a complex topic. We are going to try to bring on Benny Morris and Ilan Pape for a debate on this, the two leading historians on that. I don't want to get stuck on that. Just we're running low on time, but my personal suggestion on this topic is, and many people are going to disagree with me, we should not get defensive about the past when people were harmed if we want to reconcile. So, if Palestinians say there were ethnic cleansing, and then we get into a semantic argument, well, technically not all were ethnically cleansed. Some left, some this. That's just not a productive way forward, in my opinion. Again, I'm putting it out there that many Israelis disagree with this approach. I personally say, acknowledge wrongdoing. Let's move forward. We can't fix the past. We could fix the present. We could fix the future. Let's focus on that. I just view that as a much cleaner and better way to move the conflict forward. And again, it is debated amongst historians, so I want to put that out there. We're going to take 2 audience questions, and then we're going to move it over to the Discord for the after party. So the conversation will continue, and the community members will have the opportunity to engage with Adiel and Faraj, and also share their thoughts. Regarding the moderation, the chat started pretty good, and then it kind of got a little bit hectic as it moved on. You all need to know this. Anybody who engages in personal attacks or acts hateful, you're put on a 5-minute timeout. Okay, that's how it works. And don't come back and think you were treated unfairly. No, it's very simple. We have rules. You engage in personal attacks, you're put in timeout. That's how it works. If you don't like it, well then, just don't engage in personal attacks. It's very simple. It's always interesting how those who get reprimanded for their bad behavior then start acting like they're the victim, but just act better. And interesting, Starhopper, I see you're here. I'm not going to say you acted like a peacemaker today, but you were not one of the people put in the timeout. So that I view that as a win for us and an improvement, Starhopper. So good job, brother. Anyways, we're going to take 2 questions, and then we're also going to have final thoughts. If anyone's new here, please subscribe. We do this every Thursday. We have a lot of interesting discussions coming up. Hold on. I don't see anything worthy of asking. Some of them are some problematic questions. Okay. All right, we're gonna move to final thoughts, and then we're gonna continue the conversation in the after party on Discord. I'm gonna drop a link on Discord. Who wants to go first?
Adiel, go ahead if you want, or if you prefer me.
So I do want to clarify that my intention is never to diminish Palestinian suffering and say this didn't happen at all, it's all lies, it's all that, because again, it's just this approach. I know people who use this approach, and this is not helpful. We do need to reconcile. We do need to acknowledge what happened in the past and move forward towards a better future. That being said, I am also, for me, it's very important to, again, the nuance. It's hard for me to accept people who say it was all ethnic cleansing. It was like, I see some comments here saying that the Nakba is our Holocaust. No, I understand that it's like a huge trauma, but I do think that when we look at history, we need to look at all the factors, and that like we need to look at again the nuance in history and what happened. This is why for me it's important to present the other side of what caused this displacement. That's like just me explaining because I didn't want you, Mo, to get offended or like think that I in any way do not acknowledge the Palestinian suffering, because I very much do. And like I said in the beginning, we all need to like acknowledge this, like the suffering of the Palestinians in the land of Israel, in Palestine, in Arab countries, in the diaspora, as well as vice versa. Palestinians need to recognize our suffering. And again, I think like my bottom line is that I don't advocate for any solution, any political solution. The politics of this conflict, I think it's kind of useless to like talk about them now. And what I focus on, and I tell that to like my followers and people I talk to, focus on creating ties, of getting to know the other side, hearing each other's perspectives. Only through this dialogue between us, the people, only through that we can, you know, stop dehumanizing each other and, you know, start working and heading towards a peaceful solution and a peaceful future. And I said it before, and I kind of like got to this realization this past year, that a solution is not going to bring peace. Peace is going to bring the solution. And do whatever you can to get to know the other side. It's like over the past year, I got to know so many Palestinians for the first time in my life, and talking with them, hearing about their perspectives, not even talking about politics, just, you know, being friends with them. And all those like Palestinian workers in my hotel that I sit with them for lunch, they already invited me for like Eid al-Fitr, and like they said that they're gonna bring knafe from Nablus, from Shechem, and this is how we start. That's my bottom line.
Thank you, Adiel.
So yeah, like I appreciate you, Adiel, first and foremost for coming on. I know this, like these things can be very nerve-wracking, but I feel like it's the most important thing is for Palestinians is to acknowledge that we as a people have had an experience and continue to suffer under a systematic influence from a government, and we need to find ways to correct and to correct the wrongs that have been done to our people. I feel like there is room. I do agree with you. I do believe there is room for Palestinians to learn more about Jewish history and learn more about Jewish suffering. But I feel like the dire situation right now is to bring light to the things that are happening right now to Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah and all the individuals, all these kids that have been getting shot for whatever it is. Doesn't matter, like whether they're throwing stones or not. I don't think a kid needs to be shot for any of that stuff. And these are the things that need to be brought to light. And thank goodness that there are organizations like Beit Salem that have these things on tape that show the world what is happening, and international community. And hopefully, if there's any wrongdoing, it would be brought to justice. I hope that Israelis will learn to recognize that there could be unity that does not that is not entitled to, that there could be unity between people without the need of an ethnocentric state, and that and that people of different groups can unify under their humanity in order to live a better life and live the lives the way that they want. And so, yeah, I'll conclude by saying that. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. This was great. Obviously, we don't agree on everything, but you know, I respect you both for being able to engage on such a challenging topic so respectfully. And I think it was also a great experience for the audience, those who watched, not the ones who just spent the whole time fighting with each other in the chat, but all good. Hopefully next time they'll tune in and focus on what a truly beautiful conversation is. Great. We're going to move this to the Discord. I dropped the link one last time. Once you join the Discord, you'll see on the left-hand side, it says lounge. You click on lounge, you'll be connected. You can speak or you can just listen. It's up to you, but everybody's invited. Until next time, friends.